Wow, a lot of familiar people here today. It's really great to see.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of names I know. That's great.
Okay, I think I'll just go ahead and get started. We got people still tuning in. My name is Charlie Nunn. I'm at Duke University in evolutionary anthropology and Duke Global Health, and I run the Triangle Center for Evolutionary Medicine. And we're one of the organizers, along with a bunch of other centers, and I'll paste this into the chat, that organize Club EvMed. It's also sponsored by the International Society for Evolution Medicine and Public Health. And I hope everyone's aware of the society. It's a good time to update your membership if you haven't done so recently. And please consider coming to our conference that will be in Nashville, July 8th to 10th. And you have some links in the chat that you can follow. The chat said I had too many words in it, so I cut out another little message in there, which was to please submit journals to the society's, submit articles to the society's journal, Evolution Medicine and Public Health. And I'll paste that in separately. I think a lot of you have already been to Club EvMeds. I'll just say this is an exciting one because it's one of our book clubs, and we're really excited to have Paul Turke here to talk about his book. We haven't had one of these book clubs in a while. We're going to have some people who will moderate and ask some questions, but we really want to hear from the audience as a whole. And so we want to encourage you to ask questions. You can put those in the chat. And Randy will be, Randy Nessie will be moderating. He'll call on you as needed, depending on the timing. And also, please raise your hand and feel free to ask a question at one point. Again, we'll roll you into the conversation at an appropriate point. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Randy Nessie, who's going to do the introductions and run the show today. Thank you, Randy.
Thanks, Charlie, and thanks to everybody for making this possible. It's just a wonderful way to get together with people. So it's a pleasure to have Paul Turke here today. Paul has been a great friend and inspiration for many of us for decades and decades. It turns out that in addition to Paul, we have Bernie Crespi and Beverly Strassman, and there's something we all have in common. We were all inspired by Dick Alexander, a wonderful biologist back at the University of Michigan, especially in the 1980s. Is when this peaked and got us all going into things that we wouldn't have, career trajectories we wouldn't have pursued at all. Evolutionary medicine, I think, probably would not exist if it wasn't for Dick Alexander connecting many of us with Bill Hamilton and lots of other people. But today we get to hear from someone who's actually doing evolutionary medicine. I don't know of anyone else who has actually practiced pediatrics from an evolutionary viewpoint thoughtfully, but he's not just a practitioner. Paul has a PhD, so he really knows his evolutionary biology. And he and his wife, Laura Betzig, did some of the most wonderful early demographic research on the island of Eveluk, coming up with what I think is still the best explanation for the demographic transition. He's also published about immunology and aging. What an amazing polymath we have with us today. His book today, though, is accessible to everybody. Can you see that? I'm not sure I see mine, but it's when I picked it up, I thought, my gosh, how did he find time to write this book in the midst of everything else he's doing? And it turns out to be not just solid, but it's got a lot of interesting stuff in it, and it's humorous. It's so wonderful to have a book that people will pick up and actually read. For the plan today, we do want comments from lots of people. Beverly and Bernie will give brief comments and the like after this introduction and possibly later as well. But please put things in the chat. And raise your hand later. We'd like to have a discussion. Everybody's interested in how pediatrics could be different if it had a proper evolutionary foundation. We'd like to hear what you all have to say. And now, Paul, over to you for a quick introduction to how the heck did you become the world's first evolutionary pediatrician?
Well, first, let me say I see a lot of familiar faces out there. It's very, very nice to have all of you here. Yeah, my road to medical school, pediatrics, was kind of a long and winding one, but I'll highlight a few stopping points that I think were very important. The first was as a graduate student in anthropology, going off to Eveluk Atoll in Micronesia with my wife Laura Betzig, and I went there, as Randy was saying, interested in the demographic transition. What makes people in modern industrial societies want to limit their reproduction, whereas in more traditional societies, most people, if you ask, will say, we want to have as many as possible. So I went there to address that question, and the sort of the key data points I was looking at was who was helping whom in rearing children. As you all know, back in the day, we used to all live in kinship networks, and so it's I wanted to measure in those kinship networks particularly what older people were doing, because the demographers and economists were arguing that, back in the day that kids made you rich, and now days in modern societies, they made you poor. We have to borrow for their college and all that kind of thing. That I didn't trust the data that they were collecting, and it didn't make sense to me that hominins, after the split from other hominoids, doubled their lifespan by exploiting their children, by taking goods and services from them. That just didn't seem right to me. So I expected and proposed that these extended kinship networks, that the grandparents, particularly grandmothers, would be very helpful, and that even men also would be working hard and reproducing, if not directly, certainly not directly once menopause evolved, but indirectly increasing their inclusive fitness that way. And so I think I was among the first. I think Beverly also did some early work on this, and then subsequently many other people, Kim Hill and Hillard Kaplan and Kristen Hawks, a lot of people started to work on eventually on helpful grandparents. And so what I found was that, sure, kids are more expensive now, and we do limit their consumption, just like we do all expensive goods, but that they're always expensive. Even in traditional societies, they would be the recipients of care more than more than donors. And so Laura and I, doing behavioral scans, we found exactly that. And then that led to the idea, which I helped develop in my dissertation and some subsequent publications, which was that it was that helpfulness, that indirect reproduction by grandparents and other older relatives, that made selection stronger for longer, which then held off the evolution of aging, which allowed our lifespans then to gradually increase, reaching the 100-year or so maximum that they are today, about well, maybe 300,000 years ago, or some studies show way before that. So I think, so that's sort of the first thing. That led me into a medical area where I'm talking about lifespan and aging. And when I got back and started writing all that up and talking about it, it caught the attention of some people at Michigan, including Randy and Bernie and Bev and many others. And the next sort of stop on my road to medical school was Randy. I think because he knew I was working on that stuff, he had been putting together a group of people to talk about evolution's relevance to all topics medical. And so I think it's my work in that area. Randy also has been very interested in the evolution of aging. Has done a lot of work in that area. But I think that my work on EFLUC on that particular problem led him to invite me into that group. And it was really a wonderful group of people. It was small. There were only 5 or 6 of us were regulars, but we had visits from good people from time to time, like George Williams was significant. And so that really piqued my interest in medical topics. And I began to realize, that I'd have something to contribute in those areas. And so, and it wasn't just me that was stimulated by this. This led to the publication of the article called The Dawn of Darwinian Medicine, which a lot of people flag as sort of the starting point for evolutionary medicine. Now, I mean, everything has precedence, of course. So it's not that nobody had ever talked about evolution's relevance to medicine, but that was really a great inflection point. And I was proud and happy to be part of it. But Randy and George, of course, led the way. And that was something that pushed me further down the path towards medical school. And then the next stop that I'll mention is I went to work as a postdoc for a guy named Richard Miller, who's a pathologist at the University of Michigan. Some of you who were there at the time know Rich. Rich was working on the evolution of the human lifespan, and that's why he was interested in my work and took me on as a National Institute of Aging fellow. At the time, he was doing a lot of immunology. He was working on T-cell senescence, so I benefited there from learning a bit of immunology. And I thought it was a very, very exciting area. And that's when I sort of decided, well, I would like to do some of this stuff, but I probably don't have the right credentials for getting a job. So maybe I should go to medical school. And so I decided to do that. And I wasn't going to do a residency. I was going to be like Rich. Rich went to Yale and just got his MD and then started doing research. But once I got into medical school, a lot of it's clinical. And I ended up, I liked the kids, and I had a decision to make after medical school and residency, which was, do I want to go the fellowship route and become a professor in immunology or allergy or one of the areas I was really interested in? Or should I buy a practice and practice clinical medicine, and then in all my spare time, get back to working on things that really interested me? So I decided on the latter, and it turned out I didn't have a lot of spare time for a while. So it took me a while to get up and running. But in the 2000s, I started writing again. I wrote an article in medical school, even, I think, on thymic involution. But it was really 2008, I think, when I really started being more serious, writing an article or two every few years. And then by then I was already practicing medicine, and I had the freedom to write about whatever I wanted without, somebody over me higher up telling me, no, you got to do this, you got to write grants, you got to move up through the hierarchy and so on. So it gave me the flexibility to kind of fly by the seat of my pants. And you can see, if you read the book, that a lot of what I talk about there, and I fully admit it up front, is speculative. But I think that's important in science. It's where science advancements start. You have to come up with new ideas, be imaginative. And the only bad part about that is if you just think you're right without eventually going on to testing things. So I try to be careful in the book to let you know when I'm speculating and when there's more evidence, but or evidence bearing on the problem. But you'll have to keep in mind that I'm working in a clinic. Here I am in my office right now. I don't have hundreds of $1,000s of grant money and so on. So you're going to hear very different talks from some of the people that you've had talking at these club EvMeds before. I don't have that, but I think there's room for people like me who have a background in the field, but don't necessarily have a lab, and like I said, lots of funding and so on to collect data. So that's how I got here. What's up next?
So, Paul, can you just say a little word about what it's been like? Because you even tell your patients that you do evolutionary medicine. Do they put up with that? And I mean, and how has it actually gone for you?
Yeah, well, some do and some don't. My office is just outside of Ann Arbor, and as you move out into the countryside to the west, you'll get more people who don't think evolution is valid, and they're not really interested in me hearing my explanations for things. But there are many who do, and I have to sort of tease that out. It's not that I go into every exam situation, where I have a 10 or 15-minute appointment with somebody where I'm going to start off with a lecture about how evolution works and so on. But even without talking about the theory and why necessarily I, have some of the advice that I have, things like fever's your friend, fever's there to help us fight illness and stuff. You can, take that or leave it or get some wisdom out of that, whether you're an evolutionary biologist or you believe somebody else other than natural selection designed us well. So I try to be, respectful of people's beliefs and so on, but I'm fortunate to be practicing in a place where there are a good number of people who come in who really want to know things like, all right, they're gonna want when my baby's born, they're gonna want to give this baby vitamin K, and I can't understand why they want to give vitamin K. If vitamin K is so important, why aren't babies already born with vitamin K and so on? And so then for those kinds of people, people who ask those questions, I can really go into the weeds and discuss what I'm thinking at the time. And a lot of people are, very grateful and happy to hear not just how things work, but also why things work the way they do. I find there's a great deal of interest in broader explanations than you might typically get at your regular doctor's office.
So, Paul, I know everybody's going to want to hear what you actually do differently
All right.
because you understand it, but not quite yet. Do you have a slide or
Okay.
two you want to show about your book?
Do I have a slide?
Yeah. Or
Uh,
did you want to just summarize the book a little
yeah,
bit? And then we'll turn to Bernie
yeah,
and Bev for.
yeah. No, I think I created a slide, but I sent it over, but I don't know where it is. But the book is
Okay.
just comprised of eight chapters. I have a preface where I try to talk to my medical colleagues a little and say, I'm trying to be supportive here. I love my field, and I'm proud to be a pediatrician, but that we can improve things. And sometimes I end up being a little bit critical in the book, but uh, I want any of the physicians out there who may be watching this to know that even if you've not been evolution minded, you've still done a lot of good things. So that's basically what the preface is about. But then chapter one, I just begin with a discussion of how medical training works and how they leave out primarily the theoretical side of the scientific method. You'll hear every doctor almost that you ever read about or you hear talking say, yes, I'm an evidence-based clinician, and that's great. Nobody's against evidence, but you don't hear anybody say I'm a theory-based physician. That just sounds wrong. Nobody wants to be treated by somebody who thought up a new idea in the shower the morning before they went to work. But it's because they aren't taught in medical school the scientific method enough. Theory is sort of equated with speculation more than it is to you and me. It's Darwin's theory has 150 years of support, and it's as solid as a theory is that we have on the planet. It's comparable to the theory of specific and general relativity in my mind. So when we're talking about theory, from an evolutionary point of view, we're not talking about speculating why the Detroit Lions will never win the Super Bowl or whatever, but that's what a lot of doctors think when they mention theory. So I try to get them over that, and then I try to teach them how to understand and look for adaptations so that they're not fixing things that don't need to be fixed. So that's what the first chapter is about.
Hey, Paul.
So
Yep.
Paul, I'm going to make sure that we get time for questions and stuff. Charlie has a hand there. I'm going to get anybody see the preface for the book or the table of contents there? That gives a quick summary. Notice the engaging chapter titles. I don't think we should try to go through them all, Paul.
No, I
But
won't.
let's get people to take a look at the book.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
let's pause a moment. Why don't you say what you want to say, and then we'll go to Charlie and then Bev and Bernie. Charlie, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I have the slides here. Would you like me to at least show the first couple, including the table of contents? Would that help?
Yeah,
Okay.
it might be fine.
Sure, please. Yeah, good.
All right, let me try to do that.
And while he's doing that, we could ask, oh, there we go.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Some of the slides, there's the first one, the cover of the book, more information on where you can find it, the link for the Amazon again here, and I can paste this into the chat. And then here are the table of contents that Randy was trying to share.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, Paul, if that helps with any other things you want to say, or Randy, but I'll leave it up here for a few minutes and then take it down.
Yeah, no, that's good. And yeah, I don't think we have time to go through every chapter and what each chapter does, but Randy was telling me, that he wanted me to talk a little bit eventually about things I do differently because of my background in evolution. And so that sort of pulls from different chapters. So I can sort of start that, Randy, if you think.
Why don't you do that, and we'll let Bevan and Bernie raise their hands if they want to right now. But there's a good question in chat. Do you ever use antibiotics for kids? I mean, there's every day in the clinic is a question comes out. What's the deal?
Yeah, we do use antibiotics. We try to be very judicious about it. Antibiotics are, can be life-saving, and we certainly don't want to withhold that just in order to solve the problem of resistance. But in our office and our practice, we try not to use antibiotics, and when we don't think they're going to be clearly helpful. And I've also been in touch with some of the literature out there now saying that maybe we don't need to give antibiotics quite as long as what the standard is. I mean, in medicine we've tended to use round numbers. Everything goes for 10 days or 7 days, whereas there's really no science behind that. And some of the data coming in are showing that shorter courses can help people or help children to get over whatever illness they have, if it happens to be bacterial, but also lessen the chance of the evolution of resistance.
So Bev, do you want to chime in here, or Bernie?
Okay, sure. Yeah. So Paul asked me to read his book and write comments for him, and I did so. And I just want to say how fun it was to read Paul's book. It's really delightful. I particularly enjoyed how it's a blend of evolutionary pediatrics and memoir. And having been a friend of Paul for almost 40 years, it was just really interesting to see how his career evolved and how he's implemented evolutionary medicine in his practice. And so I highly recommend the book to all of you. Yeah, that's what I want to say. I know our time is really limited, but that's the main point I wanted to get across, is just what a fun and delightful read it is.
Well, thank you, Bev. I really appreciate that. Beverly, you were really helpful to me with your comments, so thank you.
And Bernie, are you there?
Right. Yeah, I thought I could just get the questions rolling a little bit. I really enjoyed the book as well. I saw it more as kind of a launch pad for the field. And Paul, you've really got a unique perspective. You've been at the front lines of evolutionary medicine for a very long time, and so you've seen what it's like at that interface. And based on that experience, what do you see as the main questions or problems related to child health right now, from what you've seen, and then more generally, and then what do you think that evolutionary approaches can contribute to these big outstanding problems?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of problems out there. There are, there's a lot of distrust of vaccines, for one. There's a lot of mental health issues, especially in our teenagers and so on, that stem from all kinds of environmental mismatches and misinformation that's out there and so on. And so it's a challenge. And in the clinic, there's only so much that you can do, because I see Joe Elcox there. He knows this. You're in the ER, and you can't. You have to prioritize keeping the patient alive and all that sort of stuff. With a lot of the mainstream stuff that doctors do, but I think in general that there's a lot of mismatch problems and a lot of failure to recognize adaptations on the part of doctors. And so they end up treating a lot of the things that we here would call defenses, and that means they interfere with healing, especially over the long term. Doctors can get in trouble if something goes wrong today or tomorrow, but if they do something that causes a problem 10 years from now, they don't get in trouble for that. So there is that sort of built-in bias there. And if we take an evolutionary perspective, we like to try to again, we also have to think about today more than tomorrow, but we also have a theory that guides us in taking a longer term view. Like somebody asked the question about antibiotics. Antibiotics can be life-saving, but they can also disrupt the microbiome for life. So there's some balancing act that has to go on there. But I guess if I were to take up the topic of mismatch, Bernie, if that sort of emerges in the second chapter, and it has to do with parents for the first time bringing their baby home, and they just lack. They're very bright, they're very committed, they love their child, but the social organization that they experience or have experienced over their life is very different from the type of social organization that humans experience throughout all of their evolution, and that causes problems. I think, Bernie, in your review that you published in EMPH, you started the review with this. We got home from the hospital with this baby with no manual, just a list of, we have to keep track of input and output and so on. And that all results from us living in a context where we don't see babies, where you can be 30 years old and have a PhD and never held a baby, never changed a diaper, had to deal with one breastfeeding and so on. And that is all so different from how it was back in the day. And that puts a lot of new strains and stresses on new parents. So I spend a lot of time in the first few weeks and months of life trying to get people to relax, to put their spreadsheets down, and let's not be so quantitative about how many dirty diapers we've had and whether the baby didn't wake up at noon like she was supposed to nurse right then, and how many times I've pumped, and this and that. you have to, I try to convince them that this isn't rocket science, that we're very well designed. And if you just kind of relax and let things happen and step back and rather than trying to quantitate all these things, look at your baby. If your baby is moving around, vigorous, making noise, getting all upset when you try to give her a sponge bath, and she's not lying there like a limp dish rag, well, she's not dehydrated. You don't have to supplement with formula right now. You can, that's going to interfere with, it's not that there's never reason to supplement with formula. It's just that you have to think about how you're interfering downstream with the maintenance of starting breastfeeding and those kinds of things. So I spend a lot of time with young parents, really just trying to get them to relax and understand that they really know how to do this, and that sleep's a big issue. You don't sleep when you've got a brand new baby, but it'll change. And so a lot of reassurance there that is necessary because of the mismatch in social organization. So this brings me back to what I mentioned at the start of this talk was EFA look. It doesn't happen there. You've got grandma, you've got older sister, you've got this whole kin network there to support you, and everybody has seen babies breastfeeding every day of their life, and everybody's heard babies crying, and everybody knows that it's a lot of work to bring up a baby, and so on. So it's trying to deal with that mismatch. There's a big part of what I do with new families, whether it's
Paul, there are a few good questions in the chat. I'm going to barge in here a little bit. One person asks about what do you talk to parents about obesity, and another person says something that I couldn't quite believe, that there's now an app for timing kids peeing and pooping.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I try to discourage those kinds of apps, but yes, we do talk about diet and obesity. There was a wonderful EvMed conference that I attended a year or two ago, Charlie had organized, where we had Grant Rutledge and Michael Rose there, where they were talking about their fly experiment and how they got flies of different ages to adapt to new diets and so on. And so I found, as they've extended that work to try to help explain what's a healthy diet in the age where we now have access to a lot more grain-based foods than we ever did. And I talk about how yes, we want to feed our children as we begin to feed them real foods, as much as we can, avoid the center aisles of the grocery store and all of that. But kids are likely to be, for the reasons that Rutledge and Rose pointed out, likely to be better adapted to eating a grain-based diet than we are. So I ask parents to relax. I get some parents who come in and all they want to feed their 6-month-old is broccoli, and that the 6 months old, they need more than that. They're trying, they can't be healthy themselves, but they can sure force their 6-month-old or year and a half old to eat just the very healthiest of foods, and that's fine, but it doesn't, it leads to other problems down the road. So yes, we talk a lot about diet, what a healthy diet is, at various ages. We talk a lot about obesity, but it's hard. That's a really, a key medical problem in developed countries, but it's a really hard one to address when in a 10-minute or 20-minute conversation, when this obese 6-year-old comes in and sits down next to 300-pound mom and 450-pound dad. If I could take these kids home myself for a while, that it would be I'd be able to do more for them. But you have to take baby steps with this and try to encourage the exercise, activity, and discuss what constitutes a healthy diet. So I spend a lot of time doing that because it's important over the long run.
So, and other good questions are coming in. People can feel free to raise their hands at this point with anything that they'd like to say. We love to have live questions, but I have a provocative one for you, Paul.
Mhm.
Can you say anything about mistakes that your ordinary pediatrician is making because they don't understand evolutionary biology?
Yeah, a huge one has to do with childhood food allergies. In the 1990s and up until 2008, when they finally changed their mind and rescinded their recommendations, they were telling parents to withhold all of the list of 8 or 9 most allergenic foods. And what happened during that 15, 20-year period was, while they were withholding, is food allergies went through the roof. And if you, I really don't know how they ever came up with that, the idea that if you don't give peanuts for 3 months that, or for 3 years, that you'd be somehow helping, but they did. But if you had just thought a little bit more broadly about how the immune system works and how from the beginning, as soon as the immune system becomes armed and dangerous, capable of destruction, the tolerance mechanisms have to be in place, and you can't wait 3 years for that to happen. But even more evolution minded is if doctors had and allergists had thought about the way we used to eat back in the Pleistocene and before, they'd realize that we were exposed to all the food antigens that we would ever get exposed to for our whole lives during gestation, breastfeeding, and the first 2 or 3 years of life while we're eating foods. And that's because we weren't mobile then. We grew up, we were born in a place, and we grew up and we lived and died in that place. And that place had an ecosystem that didn't vary. So the foods that were there when you were being gestated are the same foods that were there when you're 2 and 3 and 30 and 60. And so we've introduced this mismatch that doesn't happen anymore. And
But
so
that's a
we tell
great
people
example.
we tell people to avoid peanuts till they're 3 years old, and then they go off to daycare and somebody gives them a bite of their peanut butter sandwich. That mismatch is what leads to the flare in allergies.
Well, I'll probably come back and ask you more about other mistakes that are being made. That's a wonderful example. I do see a hand up, Paul. Jason Wingert, unmute yourself and go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the book, Paul. I had a chance to read it this past week and really enjoyed it. It came in handy. I teach an evolutionary medicine course, and just yesterday we were talking about vaccines and antibiotics. So I appreciated the perspectives in your book. I also really enjoyed your book from a parent's point of view. I have 2 young kids, and my 10-year-old just went to the orthodontist for the first time this week. And I wonder what your views are on, related to diet, what your views are on, strain forces through the jaw and appropriate alignment of teeth and those issues.
Yeah, it would seem like we're poorly designed because we all have to pay $5,000 these days to straighten our kids' teeth and expand their palates and so on. But the reality is I wish I could remember his name, but there's a dentist in Chicago who goes to these ancestral health conferences, and he argues, and there's some debate about this, but he argues that, you eat soft foods, you don't develop the jaw doesn't develop, the palate doesn't develop correctly. There's not enough room in there we still have the same number of teeth with the same shape and size, but we just have these smaller palates because we don't chew on things anymore. So I guess, I joke with parents sometimes and say, you got to let that baby gnaw on a stick sometime, or else you're gonna, be paying a lot of money for orthodontic work down the road. There's some awareness of that in among some dentists, and there's some debate about whether that's really the correct reason for why we do or don't have mouth sizes, jaw sizes that fit our teeth. So. did you,
Lots of other questions here. Anybody else want to raise their hand, or should we go to some others on the chat there?
Hey, Randy, I have a question. I can't seem to raise my hand. I think it's because I'm the host of the meeting.
Oh, okay.
Paul, well, first of all, it's Kevin Boyd is the person's name who does that work on.
yes, that's Kevin. You're right. Yep.
But I had another question for you. Anthropologists spend a lot of time talking about how humans are different from other primates. And I often try to make the case to my students that an overlooked aspect involves our infectious diseases. And there are two aspects to this. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. I mean, one is just the sheer number of diseases, infectious diseases that are known to infect humans.
Right.
I think there's some explanations for that with our global distribution, things like that. But the other one has to do with crowd diseases or childhood diseases. And I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on that. Do you think that's something that's unique, that the characteristics of our infectious diseases are unique? And if that's really truly characteristic of the human species, or is it just something we have a view on from the places where we live, where we are living today, and high income countries, high density populations? You have any thoughts?
I do. I mean, a very, very, very important topic. I do write a bit about crowd diseases in the book, maybe not as much as I should. I also have written about it a little bit in an article that is in Evolutionary Medicine and Public Health that I wrote about COVID. But yes, I mean, I think of the crowd diseases as sort of putting us in a mismatched kind of environment. So for 6 million years, we didn't live under crowded conditions. We evolved to deal with pathogens that are quite different from what we began to experience once we started living indoors and have crowding and so on. And I guess the point that I've made about that, and there's a lot of things that can be said about that, but the one that I've been interested in, and the COVID pandemic sort of stimulated my interest here, is that for the same reasons that young people have evolved to deal with a change in diets, this grain-based diet that we now have for the last 10, 12,000 years, for the same reason I would expect young people to have evolved an ability to deal with crowd diseases better than old people. And there's a caveat there, though, that's very important, and that is that our adaptive, what immunologists call the adaptive memory, is really helpful in terms of preventing a serious illness. And you have to have been around a while to develop immune system memory. So very young children, even though the argument that we've evolved probably to deal better with new pathogens at a young age, you have to factor in this absence of memory in the very youngest of children. But I think it's because of that more rapid evolution of our immune systems to deal with the commonalities of the crowd diseases, things like airborne transmission, for example, that 10-year-olds and 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds do a lot better than older people do. Influenza would be a good case in point, but also COVID. There's COVID is interesting too, because it takes out memory from the equation, because nobody had memory to COVID when it first emerged. But young people had been dealing with other coronaviruses for thousands and thousands of years. All of us had been, but the young people had evolved the ability to deal with it faster for the same reasons that young fruit flies more quickly evolved the ability to deal with the new dietary regimes that Rutledge and Rose exposed them to. So that's to me is a very interesting area of research. And I don't know if Dr. Graves is in the audience today, but he and I have talked online a little bit about doing an experiment with an organism like flies or other short-lived organisms, where we introduce a new pathogen and actually see if the young flies adapt to it more quickly than the older flies do, just as they did for diet in the Rose Rutledge experiments. So that would be an interesting project for some PhD infectious disease student to do, maybe collaborating with Dr. Graves. So
I'm looking for raised hands and would love to see them. In the meanwhile, I'm very curious about connecting your work on T cells with the epidemic we have of autoimmune disease, Paul. I mean, we still don't really know what is causing this epidemic of autoimmune disease, as far as I can tell. But it seems to me that your basic science work is relevant.
yeah, well, yeah, that's a tough one. Autoimmune diseases definitely have increased, and I think here, whereas unlike for childhood food allergies, um, microbiome is important for proper immune function, but it's not the key variable that's led to an increase in childhood food allergies. But I think it might be one of the key variables that has increased the prevalence of autoimmune diseases. It you know, the hygiene hypothesis or the old friends hypothesis is kind of what I'm getting at here. Our immune systems don't get exposed to some of the tolerizing factors that they did back in the day, like they do now, and therefore I think that's one of the reasons why we're more prone to some of the autoimmune problems. I
So
think
we've got a good question here from Joe, and David
yeah.
Haig is in the audience too. So let's go to
Yeah.
that. Can you unmute yourself, Joe, and go ahead and ask
Yeah,
your
I was
question?
just going to say, Joe probably knows more about this than I do.
Well, my question for you was, do you have any thoughts about how parent-offspring conflict might relate to any kind of health problems that you see? I'm thinking about how there's conflict around weaning and breastfeeding, but also just in terms of how parental attention is demanded by children, and how some parents might use sweets or screen time to kind of mediate that conflict that could have some negative health impacts on kids.
Yeah, absolutely. Good points. I mean, we all know Bernie there has done, stuff on conflicts. The children generally want a little more than what parents have evolved to want to give. What a child's optimization program is a little different from the parents' optimization program when it comes to investment. So yeah, finding ways. We're all manipulators, and children get really good at it early on, and then parents counter with things that are probably not so good over the long run. Things like handing them the screen rather, or a candy bar or something, and that can lead to problems. And you're right, those things occur over parent offspring conflict. So yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
So we've talked on kind of an individual level, but there are very few pediatricians who actually know their evolutionary biology. Are you confident enough that you could improve the quality of healthcare for kids by educating pediatricians, that you would want to insist that all pediatricians learn some fundamentals about evolutionary biology?
Absolutely. I think physicians learning evolutionary biology is great. And what I would really love to see is evolutionary biologists, at least people who have an undergraduate degree or a master's degree or a PhD, going into medical school, because the gist of evolutionary theory is pretty simple, but it's not all that simple in all of its details when we go to try to explain life, which is very complicated, especially when we get into humans and we're trying to figure out, the brain and that sort of thing. So I would love to see more evolutionary biologists become doctors, along with more doctors learning some evolutionary biology. And I think, yes, it would help tremendously. Just if we just talk about the defenses, we've got doctors interfering left and right with adaptations that have evolved to help us fight illness and injury. You know, the simple strains and sprains argument that I put in the book. You know, you probably don't want to load your 5-year-old up with ibuprofen so she can get back into the soccer game faster. You know, pain evolved for a reason, and it encourages rest and proper healing, and anti-inflammatories interfere with that. Fever, as we all know, is generally helpful. Now, the organisms, unlike strains that don't fight back, the organisms that we use fever to fight, they evolve counter strategies too. So it's not as straightforward as saying never use, you know, fever reducers, because some like think of malaria, they've evolved to do better in a heated up host and all that. So it's a little bit complicated, but just understanding the defenses would help medicine be a lot better. Particularly, I think, Randy, you can weigh in on this, but when it comes to children's mental health, you know, I think that you know, anxiety, down mood, sadness, you know, these have, you know, emotions have evolved as guidance mechanisms, and they're not perfect. They're not, you know, never interfere with them. Most of you probably know the smoke detector principle. I think it's a really great one that I tell parents and kids all the time when they're coming in with anxiety. I'm saying we don't want to get rid of anxiety. It's there, it evolved for a reason, but we want to be able to learn how to manage it. Because a lot of times we're triggered to feel anxious when the threat is overrated, that kind of thing. So I think it could be really helpful in the mental health field too, if doctors knew a little bit more about, you know, how to identify an adaptation.
Couldn't agree more with that. I mean, that's for sure. There's several good questions, and we're running short on time here. Polly she's called pediatricians terrorists. Say that question louder, please, Polly.
I think with regard to co-sleeping, I find that pediatricians are terrorists. They'd say, if you sleep with your baby, you know, the baby won't make it. And of course, when you're an anthropologist and you work around the world, everyone sleeps with their babies. So what do you find that parents feel about this?
Yeah, well, I mean, I certainly agree, and I devote a great deal of talking about that in my book. It's not co-sleeping that's bad; it's co-sleeping unsafely. You know, after you've, you know, had a bunch of alcohol and sleeping pills, and then co-sleeping on a couch or something that can be dangerous. But there, you know, there are a lot of places in the world where you know, where their co-sleeping's done, and it's done safely, Japan being one of them. So yes, doctors are frightening a lot of patients. What happens in my office is I'm not telling anybody they have to co-sleep, but I'm not, you know, that they come in and they hide it because they know that people, the doctors are supposed to be against it. And so I have to sort of tease it out of them and say, yeah, it's probably okay to do that. I also think that by being out of contact with our babies and then toddlers, even for long periods of time, that other components of development are interfered with, not just breastfeeding, for example, which is much harder to do if you're always told you have to keep the baby in a separate bed down the hall or something, you know.
Yeah.
So Beverly Strassman has pointed out that we're in an era where it's not just evolution that's left out, but attacks on science in general. Do you want to go ahead with your question, Beverly? Unmute, please.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so I was wondering what, Paul, you might do, or the society at large, in terms of editorials or any sort of reaction to the resources that are being taken away from the world's children, in terms of, for example, the cuts to USAID, the money taken away from programs on poverty, homelessness. Really, children are massively suffering. And with Kennedy in charge, and then the measles spreading in Texas and so on, it seems as though persons who care about children and who are in pediatrics, and a society that is about evolutionary medicine, not just for the strict science of it, but also to do some good out there. Is there a place, or would that for you, Paul, to get involved, or Charlie, or ISEMPH, or do you all just want to stay out of politics?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that I would be in favor of, it's no surprise as a pediatrician, I would like to see more resources going to children. I don't like some of the things that are being said about, vaccines and assaults on science and all that. I don't know that I'm the best person to to really direct myself at that. I'm pretty busy doing what I'm doing now, but I think that our program here, EvMed and EMPH, and every science organization should. I'd be happy to see more.
Okay.
More science education and more investment in children. So yeah, I don't know quite what to say beyond that. That's a huge issue and a huge problem. And yeah,
So
I'll
we
leave
could
it at
go on
that.
for an hour here, I know. There's one more question and about 2 more minutes. And the question takes us back to how we can really influence things. Let's see. Ron Willis, would you go ahead with your question?
Okay. Is there an area of practice where you feel strongly enough to recommend a change to best practice guidelines? Perhaps write a commentary for the Journal of Pediatrics.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of trying with this book to test the waters, but I have written articles which challenge, sort of the standard of care. It's a little bit more difficult to be too creative or to be too outside of the norm when you're in medicine. If you come up with a crazy idea as a string theorist, nobody sues you. But in medicine, we have to, we have to present our ideas, and then we do have to have a lot of data behind it, a lot of evidence. And so again, as I started out this talk saying, I don't have a lab, I don't have grants, I'm not really the person to do that, to collect new data, but I certainly have already tried to marshal available evidence to new hypotheses that I've had, or hypotheses that others have had that sort of challenge the mainstream approach. Again, food allergies would be one of the big ones.
Well, you have
So that's go
sorry,
ahead.
you have a clinic. You could collect data. You could do studies there with consent.
I could, yeah, I could. It's a lot of work, and
I mean, dare I say you're being too modest? You've said at the start this is a strong theory, more like
yeah,
a quantum theory. It's not
Yeah.
wacky stuff. This
Right.
should be mainstream.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I really have thought about this, thought about collecting data on certain topics. Vaccines would be one. And due to various constraints of one sort or another, like having to actually help take care of my grandchildren a couple days a week and things like that. I have not quite gotten around to that, but you're absolutely right. I should. And um, maybe this is kicking the
So
pink
you're
that
in the
I
role
need
of a
to do that.
pioneer. You are a pioneer, Paul. And
Right.
pioneers don't get big grants at first, but you've inspired so many people. I hope many people will take things away from today's discussion and get in touch with you about other possibilities. We really do have to wrap up at this point. Thanks especially to Beverly and Bernie and Charlie and making all this possible, to other people for their comments. And everybody, you'll enjoy the book if you can find a way to get it. Very much. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you guys. It's very nice to see so many of you that I haven't seen in ages. So thank you.